Welcome to Channel Security Secrets. I'm Lou Raban. On this show, we expose the untold secrets and critical insights from the people shaping the future of cybersecurity sales in the Trusted Advisor channel. If you're looking to up your game around selling security, stick around. Channel Security Secrets is brought to you by Cyber Defense Group, on a mission to shift cybersecurity from reactive to resilient. I'm excited to chat with our guest today. He's an entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and expert technology advisor with more than 2 decades of IT experience. Recognized as an authority on connectivity, cloud computing, and cybersecurity, he has spoken at major industry events, including the Channel Future Summit. He has designed transformative technology solutions for organizations ranging from Fortune 500 enterprises to fast-growing startups. He's the co-founder of Rise Technology Advisors. Eric Ludwig, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here, Lou. And boy, that sounds a lot better than I think I do myself justice. So thank you for that.
Of course, you deserve it. So let's just jump right into it. Eric, what's the biggest secret to your success in the channel?
You know, it shouldn't be a secret, but it is, unfortunately. And I think the secret is to know when to say I don't know, and to know when to say no, and know when to phone a friend. I think if you kind of look at how to summarize being a true trusted advisor, I think ultimately it's know when to say no. It's know when to say I don't know. 3, it's know when to say I know but. And 4, it's know when to call a friend. And I think the real key to our industry is integrity, is making sure we articulate our value to our clients, which isn't always we know everything, but it is we have access to virtually everything. And then to really, that number 4 is to leverage your partners, leverage people who you trust within your network, people that'll make you look good. And, don't try and do it all yourself, because when you do, you're going to fall down and clients will see right through it.
Yeah. That's a common theme, I think, with all of the trusted advisors that we speak to. I mean, perhaps sometimes people forget trust, honesty, integrity, all of that is important. Of course, we're all in sales to some extent, but you gain trust often by saying answering the hard questions and being honest. And I don't know, while it may make some people feel uncomfortable to say that, that's really the sign of a true expert, because there's a number of memes I've seen on this and stuff where you believe you're the expert at something when you know very little about it. Then there's a huge valley when you actually start to learn and realize how much you don't know, right? And then you kind of go back up a little bit from there. But it's only those that are truly ignorant that can claim complete mastery of any subject. So I think you're onto something.
I appreciate that. I think it also really, clients don't expect you to know everything, and they're skeptical when when you suggest that you do, but even about a specific topic. So I agree with you. I think a little bit of humble pie and being transparent and honest up front really goes a long way toward the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how about security in the channel and selling security? Are you finding it difficult to sell security? You've been doing it for a while, so what does that look like?
I do find that it's more difficult than the other products and services that we sell, and I think there are several reasons why. I think there are so many distinct types of organizations in the channel. You've got big Fortune 500 value-added resellers and service providers, all the way down to sole proprietorships of individuals that, are a one-man band. And then you have every permutation and iteration in between. I think it's easy to talk about security, and ultimately it's an adjacent technology and an adjacent silo, if you will, to everything that everybody does in the channel around technology. There's always a talk track around security for every component that we sell. I think the one challenge that we have found is that larger clients tend to buy security products, and by way of product services as well, from large Fortune 500 value added resellers, folks that are kind of top of the food chain in the VAR world, or they buy specifically from a security expert like a GuidePoint or an Optiv or some other permutation. So we do find that it's not difficult to bring it up. It's not difficult to have a conversation, but there are times where we find that some of our recommendations are disintermediating ourselves from opportunity because we don't sell products. And sometimes clients don't need the services, or they say they don't need the services that we provide. And ultimately, I think knowing where to press, knowing when to win, when to push. We have a mantra: win fast, lose faster, and ultimately finding partners like you who can help work with clients no matter what their estate, no matter who they buy from, and no matter where they are in that journey. So it's easy to talk about, in my opinion, Lou, but it does present some challenges that maybe the other product categories in the channel do not.
Yeah, well, I would challenge you on it to when you say it's easy, I guess you mean saying security. The word security is easy to say, but we find that there's a lot of TAs that are hesitant to broach that topic because they don't have the expertise. So, what was your transformation? I mean, you've got a technical background, so you understood security probably most of your career, but how do you speak what about the TAs that haven't had that background?
Sure. I mean, look, I learned it because I had to, and I didn't want to look like a fool. And ultimately, my background is large distribution. I was a practice lead at CDW, and we were the team that everybody turned to for the quote as a service portfolio as cloud and cloud type services were incubating and growing. And so I had to learn this stuff because clients were asking for different ways to consume these technologies, and there were a host of service providers that were offering it. And many of them were our traditional partners. Things like traditional DDoS protection or some sort of mail relay product or service. So for me, it was a defensive measure of saying, I don't want to look like a fool. So I'm going to find two or three specific adjacent security talk tracks that complement the products and services that I'm used to selling and the types of technologies that I'm used to clients engaging with us on. I think the other thing is that we need to have some curiosity, and it requires a little bit of work. It requires you to go out and read the paper. Nowadays, you don't even have to read something that's unique to security. You read the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the LA Times, Washington Post, Newsweek. It's everywhere. And so, we have to be intellectually curious. We have to find one or two work streams that complement what we talk about regularly. And then again, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and ultimately go out and create opportunity that is complementary to what you do. I think, Lou, it's very similar to when unified communications as a service became a product category in the channel. You had a bunch of telco guys and gals that were scared to death of talking about an application because we never talked about applications. We talked about speeds and feeds and networks and closed user groups and such. And so people that were out in front of that were really able to take advantage of it from an opportunity perspective. They became even more trusted to their clients. And if they were running a business or looking to monetize, which ultimately we're all in the business of doing in addition to helping our constituents, they were the ones that were on the forefront. So I see security as no different than unified communications or customer experience or infrastructure when infrastructure became big or colo. So uh, be a little curious and go out and read some articles and find some work streams. That's the part that I think when I say it's easy to talk about. I find that it is easy to bring some parallels. I completely agree and perhaps overstepped by suggesting that it was quote easy. I think it's just quote easy to talk about. That doesn't mean that it's easy to sell or support or find opportunity per se, but it is easy if you're a little curious.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love the curiosity aspect because actually, to be very good as a practitioner at security, you need to be curious and you need to be a lifelong learner. You're dead in the water in this field if you think you're going to come in, learn a couple things, and then just kind of float on that the rest of your career. Because in a week, that's old data, and you have to kind of relearn. The underlying concepts are the same, and that's probably one of the shocking secrets that we can share here on this podcast is we've been saying the same thing for 30 plus, really 40 plus years. Some of these concepts are really fundamental in security, and they're not as complicated as people think. But when it comes down to it, so the vectors of attack and the way that companies are having to protect themselves, defend themselves, that's changing in many ways. So the curiosity aspect is really interesting, and I think it is also. I think you're actually right. I do agree that the ease of having the conversation with security is probably easier. When you talk about unified comms or bandwidth or something, that's super commoditized these days, right? So if you are cold calling someone and or even a relationship you have, you're like, listen, Eric, you sold me that already. I've got a 5-year contract. What are you calling me about? But I would imagine from our perspective, you call someone up that you haven't spoken to in a while and say, hey, what are you doing about security? Do you want to? We have a someone we would like you to speak to. How can we get some time on the calendar? I think, 9 times out of 10, that person's gonna get back to you. Do you agree?
I couldn't agree more. I think that there within everything that we've advised our clients to implement in their environment becomes a security work stream. And if we're doing our jobs right and we're humble and we're curious, then there's no reason for that client not to take that call and not to be willing to have that ancillary conversation. And maybe it's something really easy, or maybe it's something very sophisticated that you've seen in the news in a parallel organization in the industry. So I couldn't agree more. I think if we as practitioners do our job and understand our client's business in conjunction with what we have sold or implemented for them, I think that ultimately there will be work streams abound, and those clients will take those calls. And if I think people are just afraid of what they don't know, they fear the
Yeah.
unknown, and they fear getting out of their comfort zone. And there's just examples up and down the channel of where people have found themselves in that position. And look, customers, they don't know everything either. And so, uh, overcome your fear, make a phone call. And again, back to the secret of saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. Just like I may not have known X, Y, and Z in the past, I may not know that now, and or that may have rapidly changed. But but I have a lot of resources available that are agnostic, that will be honest, and will help us together figure out how to help solve some of these problems. So humility and just finding stuff that clients have already implemented. Inevitably, there's something there. You mentioned, unified comms, for example, being commoditized. Well, yeah, it's been commoditized, but one of the fundamental transitions over probably the last 7, 8 years, in my opinion, has been the network connectivity. And so if you looked at how unified communications was rolled out initially, it was done over private networks. And clients spent lots of money in order to provide security and provide consistent performance with their voice communications. And really, I think the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, was COVID and people realizing that you didn't need a private network. So now everything's connected to a public network. And when it's connected to a public network, it means that you have vulnerabilities that perhaps didn't exist in the past. So there's something as simple as understanding the life cycle of a particular product line that perhaps someone is very comfortable selling and talking about and quite technical, and talking a little bit about vulnerabilities and being on a public versus a private, and how are you protecting yourself, and that could likely lead into several business and risk discussions that aren't technical at all, but rather are more estate driven and risk management driven, and those are things that anybody should be able to at least have a little bit of a conversation around.
Yeah, if you wanna speak to anyone above the maybe director of IT, you better be speaking business, and that is really relevant for cyber especially because with cybersecurity, it's the practitioners that are, able to get past the technical and speak in business terms, to your point, outcomes, shameless plug on our part, having, trademarked outcomes-based security. it's because that is really important. You can't speak about security unless you're speaking about outcomes. Otherwise, you're playing whack-a-mole. So you to have the longer term view, I think, that's great advice for whatever you're selling. Tie it to the outcomes, move your way up to the C-suite and the board, and you're going to be sticky, especially if you're solving pain points for these customers. They're going to remember that and they're going to rely on you as the trusted advisor much more than, oh, it's renewal time. I want you to sign this 3-year agreement again. Let me buy you a steak dinner. It's like I haven't spoken to you in over a year, and you have no idea what my business is, and now you want me to spend money. That's not going to be very successful for over the long term.
Yeah, I think that to add to that, the person that you've traditionally connected with, particularly for those kind of traditional, down the fairway channel people, that individual or that group of individuals, they may not be the security people, and I think that's also fearful. Um,
Hmm.
but they have responsibility in that broader security posture as well. And there's no question that they can say to somebody, hey, these guys have delivered for us in the past. And they may not be the security expert per se, but they have some great relationships. They take care of us. They make sure that our partners live up to the obligations they outline in the services engagement process. And we think you ought to have a conversation with them. And so it may not be that you're talking to the right people, and that's also fearful or causes fear for folks. But at the end of the day, ensuring you know who that audience is, how you integrate with them, when the last time you touched them was, whether they've had security incidents or their competitors have, those are all things that I think any of us that are just comfortable in our own skin should be confident.
Absolutely. And it's interesting too, because we talk about having these conversations in security. It is can be a more complex sale.
Yeah.
Someone says, yeah, I want these 10 cities around the globe to have a certain amount of bandwidth, get me 3 quotes, and let me sign on the dotted line and collect your money. That is it's obviously never that simple, but it's a lot more simple doing that than it is to say, well, let me understand your business. What are your goals over the next 1 and 3 years? What's been happening? Are you growing? Are you shrinking? What's your attack surface look like? Things like that. And again, without getting too, I think there's that line that a lot of TAs, rightfully so, are a bit afraid of stepping over, because then if someone's like, oh, my attack surface, and then they just start getting technical, and the trusted advisor's not ready for that, there's going to be a bit of backpedaling. But to your point, it's like, hey, listen, you're getting technical. That's not really my area of expertise, but what I can do for you is introduce you to the experts, which would be us, or whoever the supplier might be. So that, I think, is really relevant too. That those complex sales take a little more time. In the short term, they might not be as profitable as those huge bandwidth or data center deals that seem a bit easier to get across the line, at least from a complexity standpoint. But it makes you, when you go in and you lead with security, and then you start solving these very, very relevant business issues, you're sticky. You're in there, as long as you're the people that you're speaking to. And that's the other thing, I think, which is really perhaps a secret here, is the worst thing that can happen is when you're the person that you're working with, they go to another company, or they get fired. That's even worse. And maybe you've been, your champion internally is no longer there. Now, if you haven't made relationships with the other C-suite executives and other people that make decisions, then you could be dead in the water with an account that maybe you've been working 10, 15 years. So being able to have these bigger conversations, I think it really gives you longevity where you might not have had it if you're just one person that's your champion.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, you present you being cyber defense group presents opportunities for clients to have that business conversation and to start the discussion without being technical, talking about things like, do you have a cyber insurance policy? And, when was the last time you renewed your policy? And what does your policy call for? And how might underwriting look different this year than it looked last year? Things like governance within different components of how they go to market, specifically around AI. I had an opportunity with a pretty large, actually a very large financial institution in the Midwest, and it was for their contact center. And it was a real easy chatbot type engagement. And I went on their website and their chatbot was horrendous. It was just, it was hard to believe that for a firm of their size, we're talking probably 20 to 30 billion in revenue and close to a trillion, perhaps more in assets. They had a almost non-working chatbot. Well, the problem is they can't get out of their own way. And when I spoke to the senior VP of customer experience and said, why do you have such a bad chatbot? She said, well, we have a governance council around AI. And every AI product that gets discussed and implemented goes through this laborious, rigorous process. And wouldn't it be great if that created an opportunity, which it did for me? Regrettably, my champion left the firm to
Mm.
say, who do you use as someone that helps you run through governance around AI across the entire estate? So those examples abound, and it's just a matter of kind of understanding the business aspect of it and understanding the governance. Who is it? A board? Is it a person? Is it an organization? What are their investors looking for? How have they represented themselves in terms of being a secure environment? And then more importantly, what are other people in their industry doing? What are their competitors doing? And there, you can gain a lot of insight in those discussions to talk to your advocate, and then find ways to use that as a springboard to other conversations that can still remain business focused rather than technical.
Yeah, yeah. I think a big question too should be why. Don't be an order taker. We've seen this so many times. I had actually a very negative experience with one company that wanted to do a penetration test, and they clearly needed a lot more. They needed a commitment to a security program. They had no one, and it was again a decent size firm, and they did they were adamant, and the trusted advisor, even though we back channeled with them and said, hey, listen, we really want to give them something that they need versus this security theater stuff. And they so we had the conversation, but unfortunately the TA didn't have, they wanted to just take the order. They were like, no. And I understand, listen, if you've got 8 projects, this is one, you've got some political capital and you don't want to rock the boat. I don't fault the TA for that, but it's frustrating because then the customer's not getting what they need. So I mean, being able to say, if you can, why? Like, why are you asking for a penetration test? You've done it every year. It makes it up to the C-suite and board. It says that if you drop a USB key in the parking lot, so, someone may or may not plug it in. But what about the fact that your HR offboarding process doesn't actually exist, and therefore, if someone has admin privileges, whether they picked up a USB key or not, they can log in 2 months after they were fired
Yep.
with cause, and cause havoc in your system. A penetration test is not necessarily going to illuminate that. And so I think when trusted advisors can feel confident in saying, listen, we want to really ask you why. And that's to your point, Eric, that, you really want to get deep into the business and understand, hey, are we just ticking a box here? Or are we actually trying to do something to move the needle forward?
I agree 100%. I think some of the things that have helped me are, we created a what we call the wheel of zero trust back when everybody talked about zero trust. And, it's funny because you hear the packaging of these conversations and marketing changes, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, the function of it remains the same. And so we tried to create the wheel of zero trust, and it was UDAN, user device application network, and ultimately within UDAN there are products, that point solutions that customers are purchasing and implementing across that entire wheel, and some of them have really nothing to do with zero trust. Some of them have everything to do with zero trust, but each of them represents an opportunity and a vulnerability, truth be told, for a client. And so, I think another great tool to find where your entry point is and what you're comfortable with is Sunil, you and the cyber defense matrix. You know, that is a that is an incredibly powerful tool for TAs to take a look at before you go in and talk to your client, and start to map out within the cyber defense matrix, what do you know about that customer?
Right.
And
Right.
where might you find something that you're comfortable with? This notion of cyber resiliency, which is again repackaging of disaster recovery,
Yeah.
sounds a heck of a lot better
Yeah,
if it's
exactly.
cyber resiliency than if it's business continuity, where it went disaster recovery. Well, business continuity is a little different than disaster recovery. And then, oh, well, cyber resilience is better than business continuity. And so, there are components, I think, of that matrix of the wheel of zero trust around UDAN and other elements, I think, that TAs can leverage to look through and find that inflection point. But there are some key things you got to know about. You got to know about incident response. You need to know what tabletop exercises are. And these things are readily available on the public internet for TAs to go and research and add to their nomenclature and add to their toolbook of alphabet soup from telco days,
Right.
and know about a couple of these things, and then just ask those questions, and inevitably it'll take you where you want to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, you're talking about curiosity, but there's also the fact that, lean on the suppliers, lean on us. We like to do account mapping. We like to have those conversations with the trusted advisors before they have those conversations with their customers so we can point out, what do you know about them? Here are some questions to ask. I think enablement is a big part of that too. So it's really that, I think, having the partnership with a good trusted supplier. And you brought up another thing that I just had to comment on, Eric, which is I love Udon, by the way. That's really good. I hadn't heard that before. So it's great because it helps, look at the different applications. One of the issues we see is the configuration drift and the actually the poor implementation of these tools. And that's where we've said, like, for us, we're doing people and process. We're saying cyber defense group, we do the people and process. We'll help with the technology. We've got a great engineering staff, but we're not, to your point, we're agnostic. We don't care what you have, but we're not going to lead with the tools and the technology. We're just going to make sure that they're implemented correctly. And I think where a lot of trusted advisors may go wrong, and they may have been burnt a bit on security, is when they have recommended a tool or a vendor, usually maybe MDR or something like that, and it's a good entry point. It's relatively easy to sell compared to the other stuff. But when you just let the vendor lead, if you're not overseeing as a trusted advisor, and I would argue that that's part of the job of a trusted advisor, is to not just get the money and get the quotes and then move on to the next, but to make sure that there's, post implementation support and it's configured correctly. I think there's a pain point right there where a lot of promises are made by the vendor, and if there's not oversight on the implementation, they can still get hacked, even if they had, insert amazing security tool here. Have you had that experience?
I haven't had it specifically in security, but I've certainly had it in other aspects of being a trusted advisor. I mean, you can build the most resilient networks possible, but there's still outages.
Yeah.
And I, I think, I think what it does is it creates an opportunity for us to say there is no silver bullet.
No.
And anyone that comes in and says there is a silver bullet, you should show them the door and walk them out, because there isn't one. And there are always different ways to do things. And there are varying levels of investment that clients can make to statistically reduce their vulnerability. And every single one of them needs a separate set of eyes, every one of them. And there should be opportunity abounding for organizations that are actually supporting their clients. And you make a good point about a lot of TAs just kind of zoning out. They find an opportunity, they hear security, they register it, they get Lou's team on to talk about a security awareness program or a compliance program, and they're tuned out. They're multitasking, they're doing something else, and they're not taking away perhaps from that discussion. So it goes back to being curious, where if your client is making the time to engage with your partner or engage with you, it's incumbent for you to recognize that, in my opinion, and to join them on taking the time. Moreover, these services are not in perpetuity. They're not like a circuit. And even a circuit nowadays, with commoditization and the race to the bottom, the varying media available. I was in South Haven, Michigan this weekend for Labor Day. We have family, friends, and neighbors that have a farm in, middle of nowhere. It's like 7 or 8 miles away from South Haven. And South Haven is certainly not a burgeoning municipality. If you're from the Midwest, you might know it, but if you're not, you probably don't. In fact, you even mentioned when we were talking,
Yeah.
before we went on air, you know Grand Haven, but you never heard of South Haven.
Never
So,
heard of it.
but the reality, they didn't have internet for a long time because it's too expensive. So then they got a HughesNet service, which was terribly expensive, unbelievably slow. You couldn't do any kind of good quality service over it because of the delay. Well, now they have Starlink. And I'm the geek that I am. I'm speed testing out in the back by the fire and, in the front of the house, in the garden, et cetera. And it's pretty remarkable that these services are available everywhere. And
Yeah.
so, for us, it's a matter of sticking with those clients so that when those rev cycles change, when markets evolve, when new technologies become available, when there are new ventures or entrants into the market, that we know who those people are. We've supported our clients and we've been with them, good or bad, and we're transparent. So I expect and I articulate to clients, when you look at these security services that we may recommend, that doesn't mean that you're never going to have an incident. But what it does mean is that you are responsible, you're a steward of your internal coworker and or client information and data, and that you're potentially protecting yourself from what could be a much bigger problem down the road by making small investments now. And that typically does resonate, and it does require organizations to have resources that can at least, you talked about through implementation. We don't fancy ourselves as project managers. We suggest that our service after a client makes a decision is program management. And that's where we have to be an advocate for our clients, and as well being an advocate for our partners, ensuring that both parties align and both parties are delivering as advertised and helping to keep that train on the track. Then they'll come to you for everything, even if every time you're engaging a trusted partner like you, Lou, and your team or other suppliers, they'll listen and they'll engage.
Yeah, yeah, and bringing it back to what you said before too, Eric. Such great points. You were talking about tabletops and how I love the how the words change, the monikers change, maybe the acronyms change, ZTNA and all of this stuff, and how disaster recovery is now cyber resilience and all this. But you talked about tabletops and you talked about incident response, which is a topic very close to near and dear to my heart, being a responder and leading, tons of these. And we often say, full disclosure, we make a ton of money when we go in for an incident response, usually, especially if it's like a ransomware incident or something. Usually the insurance is paying it, the retainers are flying. It's almost like an investment for us as a company, meaning that it's people just dropping money into our bank account. And so you would think that we would want to do more of those. And to be honest, there was a time earlier in our history when CDG was, more embryonic, I'll say, where I actually went, after that kind of work. And that's a topic for another podcast. But essentially, we prefer to do it proactively. It's less money. It's completely counterintuitive. But you made the point as well, Eric, that it's you can convince your customers to commit to this stuff proactively, and especially the ones that are not traditionally committing to this stuff. Like, we're seeing a lot in auto dealerships, and anyone around the auto industry right now is just getting hammered. And one of the reasons is usually it's a low tech environment. They're just using it for point of sale or writing contracts. However, think about the amount of personally identifiable information they have, loan documents, social security numbers, date of birth, all the stuff that's really juicy to someone that wants to commit financial fraud, and they're unprotected, and because they're also unregulated. If you can convince them, and we've been successful with some of them, to say, hey, listen, you can see that your peers are getting hit here, that they've already, there's news articles about them. Let's talk to you about how you stay out of the news. And what's just shocking about that is they can amortize like 1/10 of what an incident response costs over a year, and get to a much better place than their peers are. So if they just invest, 10, 20, 30K per month, let's say between 150 and let's say 240, let's say 1,000, 240K. Sounds like a lot of money when your budget for security has been 0, since, you started 60 years ago. However, the cost of an incident usually runs in the millions, even if you have insurance, and those policies aren't being written anymore, So, all that to say that, committing proactively, looking at their business, saying, "Hey, listen, let's do some things that are going like tabletops," and a tabletop exercise, that's probably, definitely 10 times more effective if you just wanna do a check the box exercise than a pen test, because a pen test might say, "Hey, there's some stuff out there that you have to close up," but I guarantee you 90% of the firms, you can just do a vulnerability assessment and find out what's open, you know what I mean? But with a tabletop, there's so many things that illuminate, like, everyone thinks they have it covered until they're like, wait a second, we don't even have a call tree. We don't even know who to call. If everything goes down, what if John, the director of IT, is in it, overseas? It's 3 in the morning. He's asleep after a big night out from a wedding in South Africa. Like, or what are we gonna do? And that's really eye-opening. So I just, everything you're saying, I just hope the trusted advisors are listening to this, because it's absolutely relevant from us practicing on the ground.
I have three points to make from that. That's great. First, we'll start with security practitioners they don't like to sit and stare at a screen. They want to work. They
Mhm.
want to figure stuff out. They want to compete just like the rest of us compete. So this notion of red team, purple team, folks that are trying to attack and others that are trying to defend, they like that stuff, and it exposes where they're really strong and where they're not. And I think security practitioners appreciate that because it requires them to do more than just sitting at a screen waiting for an incident. So you can get some sponsors within, kind of down tree of folks that are actually doing the work when you start asking questions if you're exposed to those resources. The two other things I'll mention, because you brought up the automotive industry, anybody that is in the automotive industry, whether they're selling new cars or selling cars or to servicing cars, fully understands the idea of investment in security. Number one, CDK Global, who owns, I don't know, 90, 95%. When you go into a car dealership and you buy a car and you go into the back where the manager who's actually writing the deal tries to sell you the clear coat and all the other things that you may or may not buy, the extended warranty on a new car that comes with a 5-year bumper to bumper warranty. It's like
Oh, yeah.
all the paperwork that they generate comes from a system called CDK Global. And last summer, it was down for weeks because it was hit with a ransomware attack. And literally, you had car dealerships, big ones, like Fortune 500 publicly traded ones, doing old school black, white, and gray forms that most people who are young enough have never even seen, where if you don't press hard enough, you can't see it on the copy that you get. And so they understand, because they lost a lot of money and a lot of productivity, and they couldn't write orders as fast as they needed to. Some of them sold cars to people that probably they shouldn't have sold them to because they couldn't do their due diligence because the systems were unavailable. So anyone that sells a new car, you can bring up and Google it, CDK Global outage, and you'll be able to go into an automotive dealership and have a constructive discussion. On the flip side, people who are servicing vehicles, there are new mandates. So one of our clients is an automotive dealer group, and there are new manufacturer requirements for bandwidth, minimum bandwidth requirements to service vehicles. BMW and Volkswagen, before the end of the year, require dealers that do service to have a minimum of a gig because their
Wow.
systems are security. Their systems are entirely security driven. If you look at BMW and Volkswagen Group and others, yes, they're car manufacturers, but they're technology companies.
Oh, yeah.
They're making money on subscriptions, on all sorts of internet connected components within their vehicles. And so what does that mean? That means there's a potential for a vulnerability. At a minimum, if you're servicing vehicles and you have a gigabit to the internet and you get hit with a denial of service attack, you can't service vehicles anymore.
Yep.
Where are those people going to go? They're going to go down the road to your competitor who's up and they may never come back. So, and what does that cost to, well, there's an opportunity cost, there's a cost of risk, there's a cost of goods sold, there's a cost of delivery. So every person in the trusted advisor community, they know how to sell a gig circuit. Well, the telcos sell denial of service.
Yeah.
So it's a simple add-on that gets a security conversation going that then gives folks an opportunity to then step back and talk about how do you test things? Do you have a CISO? Go look at what, and this is pivoting a bit, but go look at what jobs are open for that organization in security and find out, are there hundreds of jobs for folks that are security practitioners? Do they have a gap at the C-suite in the CISO seat? Because if they do, firms like yours provide virtual CISO and virtual work that also provide checklist of different duties and jobs that folks have to complete in order to successfully be a CISO. Challenge the organization to say, do you really want to hire a full-time staff member that could then leave the organization, which is probably what happened and why you're asking to hire a new person. So
Often. Yeah. Mm.
it's being curious. So understanding, if you're an automotive company, what happened in the industry, what's going on in the services business, asking about something you're comfortable with, and then being curious and going on their website, go to Indeed, go to some of these places and check who are they looking to hire, and then how does that potentially correlate into a portfolio and partners like CDG and the ability to come in and create a prescriptive plan and fill heads that maybe they can't fill on their own.
That's great, Eric. I mean, that's phenomenal advice. One of the, get LinkedIn Sales Navigator if you don't have Apollo or Zoom Info or something, and then look at. That's the first thing I do when less and less am I going out and doing thankfully the hard yards of prospecting and stuff like that. I'm not doing it day to day now, but once in a while I'll be like, okay, we're speaking to this company, and I'll the first thing I'll do is exactly what you recommended. I'll look and see, okay, security. I do a search. Get them up in LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and then I look at people, and then I do security. It's that simple. And often, I'll see there's either zero people with security, or the person that has the title for security is also the director of IT. And it's like especially if it's for a couple thousand person organization, there's no way they have the time to properly look after security and look after the IT. And then if you look at their team and things like that, it's that was great advice. And I hope this is, we got some really good nuggets that are coming out here. I hope that people are listening and taking notes, because this is great stuff. And one other point that I wanted to make on what you were talking about with the team, that's we stopped, we still call it vCISO for SEO purposes. We have vCISO, but what's really important is we don't do just vCISO. We're coming in with a team. It's one of our value props. And often, we don't call it vCISO because we're working with chief information security officers, and they might have a team, but their team is already busy enough. So we come in and augment, or at least look at things that we can help them with. And that might be threat intel and stuff like that. So all that to say that even if they do have a security team, that's not a reason to say, okay, you've got security covered, let me sell you a product. There's still areas where we can help. And I imagine there's other providers as well, where it's not just the vCISO. It's like, let's speak to the CISO or the CISO, and then find out how we can help. But I wanted to pivot also, because we're running close to time here, for just personally, do you have a personal story maybe that demonstrates where cybersecurity might have had a direct impact on your life?
I have had probably a half a dozen instances where my credit cards have been compromised, and
Yeah.
I tend to use that as a talking point with our clients because this notion of intelligence and AI in security is not new. And so, I had a customer in particular tell me, we're not going to implement AI in our security estate." And I asked why. And uh, he was one of these guys that had this big burly personality, and it's kind of the guy that, where I say stay humble and know when to say I don't know. I don't think that's in this gentleman's vocabulary. And he could be a lineman for an SEC team because he likes to go around and hit people whether they have the ball or not. Um, and
Figuratively and literally.
and literally, right, and he was pretty adamant about the lack of need for AI, and, I basically challenged him, but in a way that I felt was not confrontational because whether you win or lose, you lose every time when you do something like that, and so it was I asked I said, "Hey, have you ever had your credit card compromised?" I'm an unlucky guy where there have been periods where within a couple months, my credit card has been compromised, 2, 3 times. Somebody call me and say, "Did you just buy an iPad in Paris?" And no, you can also see I just bought a coffee at the Starbucks around the corner. Well, that's AI.
Yeah.
That's machine learning. That's behavioral analytics. That's a credit card company looking at correlating events. And in this case, it's when did you swipe your credit card? Did you use your card physically or was it over the internet? And where did you buy it? And then knowing that if I just bought a cup of coffee with my credit card in Starbucks around the corner, that there's no possible way that an hour and a half later I could buy an iPad on the Champs-Élysées in Paris.
With a card present. Yeah, card present
Correct.
transaction. Yeah.
And so this notion that, "Oh, I'm not gonna implement AI," and I said that specifically to the client. Now, I haven't won the day yet, and I think, in this instance, this customer, he's just a difficult client, but it allowed me to take what has been a personal experience with security, and it's a basic one in my own credit card experience, to then correlate that to machine learning, behavioral analytics, looking at incidents and points in time. That's what security posture and security health does in many cases, is looking at different compelling components in a client's estate, understanding where the risks are, and looking at how do we proactively determine where we might be able to A, stop something, and or B, improve the interconnectiveness between one point solution and another point solution. And it takes people like you guys and like your ability to provide a programmatic approach and look at an outcomes based view to say, hey, we're going to take the same approach that Visa or American Express does into how you go out and use your credit card. So I do use that experience to talk to clients, but specifically for that client, it allowed him to say, "Huh." Now it didn't necessarily help me sell anything, and
Right.
truth be told, I don't want to talk to the guy anymore because, first of all, I don't think he's going to buy anything, and if he does, he's going to be the world's worst customer. And finally, we're at a point in our business where we can say, "Yeah, that's not good business, even if it's business." But nonetheless, I think we should all have that kind of an example in our bailiwick, in our nomenclature, to be able to draw from it and try and show how these things are real in day-to-day life.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and since you touched on AI, I will mention that AI, if for anyone in any company to say, "Well, we're not dealing with AI," right there, I can immediately just know that their marketing department is putting down a company credit card using AI and probably pumping, sensitive information through that and contracts or whatever, and that's just dangerous. It's better to know. It's kinda like security where they're like, "We don't wanna do an assessment. We know we have a lot of problems." It's like, "Okay, that's, not a really good strategy." So that's great, and I'm glad that you're able to use that, but yeah, you were probably in Miami when the credit card got stolen. So it's that seems to be like the Miami and Vegas are the 2 that they're just stolen constantly.
It does seem Miami, that does happen a lot there,
Oh,
there's no
it's
doubt.
horrible.
But there's no safe place, in my opinion, nowadays.
Not anymore. So you're in Chicago, Chicago area. What got you here through it? We're running close on time, but if you can, kind of abridge how you became a trusted advisor. You said a little bit about you were, had a lot of responsibility at CDWs. So yeah, tell me how you got here.
Sure. I mean, the role at CDW was a trusted advisor before trusted advisor was even a term, and it started as just a telco guy. I spent over 10 years at AT&T out of college, mostly as an international specialist, and I was always the guy that was willing to talk tech. So I was a managed services guy for a while. We talked about disaster recovery and business continuity, and sold what was the network integration portfolio at AT&T. And I when I joined CDW, I was part of the hosting division, the managed hosting and managed services group. But that draw back to the telco space really kind of stuck with me, and so I was part of what was a large team that generated very significant top line and gross profit numbers, and we were trusted advisors for our clients. And it started with stuff they didn't want to deal with, which was dealing with telco billing issues and chronic troubles, and construction fees and whatnot. And that evolved into figuring out what works, when, where, why, and how. And at CDW, we were keenly aware of the stitching between a service that we might recommend and a manufacturer that buttered the bread, Cisco or Dell, prior to that EMC, or IBM or HP. And so we became comfortable asking questions about where clients have investments, and then correlating those to products and services that exist with a different purchasing and consumption model. For example, you use Dell data protection. Well, there are Dell data protection opportunities in the channel for clients that don't want to buy another box or maintain backups, et cetera. And so that evolved into where we are today, which is all of these services are now available as a service. Very few people are purchasing them and managing them, and care and feeding for them. And so, our role as we exited CDW and started Rise, it was the same motion that we've generated for many years. It was using our two ears and one mouth to listen first and talk second. It was asking questions about: what investments do you have? Who are you working with? What do your contracts look like? Where are you being, where you find yourself successful? There, everybody wants to save money. And so it's an easy discussion to say cost optimization fits in four areas. It's either renegotiation of an existing agreement, it's a vendor swap, it's cutting heads, sadly, or cutting operational expense, or it's new tech adoption and minimizing other potential increasing costs. And so
Mhm.
if you stick to those four or five things, I don't know that it matters what jersey you're wearing. I think it's just a matter of having those broader discussions. And so Ed Wu and I founded Rise, and we have carried that same banner we had at CDW. We've invested in program management and back office and client support, and we will continue to do that so that our customers stick around and invest in us, because we certainly are investing in them.
Great. So Eric, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, Lou. People can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not a Twitter or X guy. I'm LinkedIn, risetechadvisors.com. You can follow our page. I'd love for you to follow our page on LinkedIn as well. If you have ideas or you'd like to engage with us, by all means. We do work with other trusted advisors who have relationships but have blind spots in certain areas of technology where we agree not to go over those guardrails. So hit me up on LinkedIn, Eric with a C, or check us out at risetechadvisors.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric Ludwig. This has been really just an absolute wealth of information.
Well, thanks for having me, Lou. Appreciate you reaching out to me and supporting Rise, and offering some great advice to those of us in the channel. We're glad to have you, and we're real fortunate to have you.
Thanks, Eric. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone that is watching and or listening. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell someone about this podcast. And thanks again, Eric. And this has been another exciting episode of Channel Security Secrets. See you next time.
That's a wrap.
for this episode of Channel Security Secrets. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes, guest info, and more episodes, visit us at channelsecuritysecrets.com. Channel Security Secrets is sponsored by Cyber Defense Group. When it comes to protecting your business, don't settle for reactive. Partner with experts who build resilience from the ground up.